Shalom everybody, and Chag Sameach. Shavuot is coming up, and Shavuot, traditionally, according to our tradition, is the Chag associated with the giving of the Torah, Chag Matan Torateinu. And according to the tradition, on Shavuot, that was the day that Moshe went up to Sinai, Mount Sinai, in order to receive the Ten Commandments, Aseret HaDibrot, and brought them down to the Jewish people. According to the tradition, what happened after that was that Moshe stayed on top of the mountain for the next 40 days and 40 nights, in which God taught Moses the rest of the Torah. Many of the rabbis in the Talmudic period were really interested and intrigued what was actually going on for those 40 days and 40 nights. What was Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher, doing up there for so long? What happened while they were there? And there's a series of different, what we call midrashim, or stories that the rabbis tell, where they imagine what happened on the top of Har Sinai when Moshe was there with God. And what's interesting about many of these stories is they actually reveal to us what the rabbis think about what the Torah is itself. Through the story, we learn about their understanding of what the Torah is. So what we're going to do in the next few minutes is study some of these stories and see what it's got to tell us about the Torah. The first, and I must say probably my favorite, is a story in Masechet Menachot. And it's a story in which Moshe Rabbeinu finds himself on the top of Har Sinai, and he finds God tying crowns to the top of every single letter in the Sefer Torah. If you know, the Sefer Torah has these different kind of crowns on the top of the different letters. And Moshe asks God, Hashem, why are you doing this work? Who's going to take notice of every single tiny little mark and crown on the Torah? And God turns around to Moses and said, one day in the future generations, there's going to be a great rabbi, and his name is Akiva, and he will expound, he will derive, he will learn out from every mark in the Torah, hills and mountains upon mountains of halachot, of laws. Moshe, obviously, as a response to that, turns around to God and says, wow, what an amazing rabbi. Show him to me. So Moshe turns around, and it's like a Wayne's World moment. And he turns around and finds himself at the back of the 8th row of Rabbi Akiva's lesson, his shiur of Torah. And Moshe listens to the shiur, listens to the lesson, and he can't understand a word of what they're talking about. Can't understand a word of what they're talking about. And he gets really, really, really upset. How could it be that this is the person that's learning from the Torah? They're learning all these halachot from the Torah. I don't understand. This is the Torah that I'm learning. I don't understand any of it. Until eventually, one of the students in this study hall asked Rabbi Akiva, where do you know this law from? And Rabbi Akiva answered him, this is a law that's been passed down from generation to generation to Moses himself. And then Moshe was happy. I'm going to stop the story there for a moment and just analyze it a little bit. What does this mean that Moshe didn't understand the laws? Well, that kind of makes sense. Moshe was in ancient history. Akiva's much further in time. He doesn't understand what they're talking about. And why does he get worried? He thinks that there's no connection between the Torah that's been learned by Rabbi Akiva and the Torah that he received on Sinai. And he's really worried and upset about it. Till eventually he realizes that actually this is the process of the Torah, that it's going to change and develop and grow over time. And once he realized that the Torah is going to be something that's alive, something that's not just going to be static according to the Torah that he received, but it's going to grow and develop and change and evolve over time. connected to the heritage and at the same time connected to the heritage, that's what makes him happy. He realizes that the Torah is both, on the one hand, very conservative. It keeps the tradition, but on the same time is also radical and new and changes and evolves. And that makes Moshe very, very, very happy. The story doesn't end there though. Moshe returns to God. Remember, we're talking about Moshe on the top of Har Sinai. And he says, wow, this man, Rabbi Akiva, is such a great rabbi. Show me his reward that he receives. And God turns around to Moshe and says, okay, turn around and you'll see it. Wayne's World moment again. He turns around, and what does he see? He sees the tragic, terrible end to Rabbi Akiva's life. Unfortunately, as we know in history, Rabbi Akiva was tortured and killed by the Romans for teaching Torah publicly in his time, and was killed by the Romans, probably in Caesarea. And Moshe returns to God and says to Moshe, Moshe says to God, if this is the Torah, and this is the reward that someone receives for teaching this Torah, God replies, unfortunately, in a very abrupt way, shut up. This is what I've decided. The story is really, really difficult to understand. What's going on here? Why is the reward for the Torah such a tragic end for Rabbi Akiva? And the answer is that there's a warning here about the interpretation of the Torah. We need to, it could be potentially very dangerous. What happens when we interpret and change, and it becomes unrecognizable? How do we make it? We don't really know the great godly plan for everything, and it could be really, really dangerous. And that's just one of the midrashim that talks about what happened on Sinai. But I'm going to end with one more midrash, which I think maybe can help us understand this difficult text of Moshe and Rabbi Akiva. It's a very, very simple one. The midrash asks, how did Moshe know when it was day and when it was night? He was on Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. How did he know when it was day, and how did he know when it was night? And the Midrash answers that Moshe studied the written Torah, the Torah shebichtav. God taught Moses the written Torah during the day, and that's how he knew it was day. But in the night time, he taught him the Torah she'ba'al peh, the oral Torah. Now, obviously, this midrash is a metaphor. It doesn't really mean day, night, the written Torah, the oral Torah. It's symbolic of what the written Torah versus the oral Torah represent. The written Torah is taught to Moses during the day, time of clarity. Everything can be seen. The Torah, the written Torah, is received to the people through Moshe, through a process of nevuah, prophecy. God dictates to Moshe exactly, black on white, exactly what the message of the Torah is. The Torah she'ba'al peh, however, the oral Torah, is taught at night when things aren't so clear, where we have to work out our interpretation for ourselves. We don't necessarily know with clarity whether our conclusions are the right conclusions or the wrong conclusions. But that being said, nighttime is also a mysterious, fun, exciting time. Great bands make music at night. They don't make music during the day. That's the time when the interesting things happen, at night. So the Torah she'ba'al peh is our challenge to create this music of interpretation of what the Torah is. And I think when I conclude all of these different midrashim, what they're really trying to tell us is that we need to create a living, breathing relationship with the Torah. On the one hand, we need to be like Moshe and receive it black on white as this great tradition that we've received. But on the other hand, we also need to interact with it. We need to turn it over until we get a better and greater understanding of the Torah. And this is what we should be celebrating this Shavuot as we prepare ourselves to receive the Torah one more time this year. Chag Sameach, everybody.